jury is present, sir.
Okay, very good. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Burney.
Afternoon, Mr. Griffith.
I want to be sure we understand what you've done. You did a analysis of various bank accounts, seeing deposits in and money out. Is that correct?
So for the tracing, it was specifically the alleged stolen funds. I would just trace them out as they went through the bank accounts using that first in, first out method.
I mean, did you analyze any accounts that were stolen, what you contend to be stolen funds were not deposited into?
There's probably one or two accounts, maybe stolen money didn't hit, but any account under Alex Murdaugh's name at Palmetto State Bank and Bank of America, those were the primary two accounts.
But, I mean, you're aware that he earned income as a practicing attorney?
Yes, yes.
And did you segregate that monthly income from?
Yes, so what I would do is prior to these funds going into those accounts, using that first in, first out method, I would completely deplete whatever income or deposit was in that account prior to, so we could separate each check out.
And you, in your testimony here today, you for the most part, limited your analysis to the $792,000 of the Ferris fee. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the only tracing we went over today.
Okay, and then at the end, you testified about essentially Mr. Murdaugh's, I guess it was a analysis of liabilities versus assets?
Right.
About
so,
whether he had enough to pay A, B, and C?
Right, so what I did for the date of June 7th, the accounts we had, I looked at balances in addition to outstanding loans. So that's how I was able to determine that.
And that was just purely balances in financial accounts, is that right?
That's correct.
And did that include any analysis of his 401k or retirement account?
No, in the balance sheet I had no, because those were in retirement accounts.
Okay.
So obviously, you have tax implications and penalties and fees associated with those.
And did that analysis include the value of any real estate holdings?
So I was just looking at outstanding, what he owed the bank.
Did that?
I didn't have up to date June 7th, 2021 appraisals for every land he owned.
Sure. And I think we all understood your answer, but your answer is no, it did not include an analysis of any equity in real estate holdings. Is that correct?
No, because I would not be able to determine that to the date.
And your analysis also did not include any interest he may have in real estate partnerships, correct?
Such as Redbeard and Zero United.
Well, let's start there, Redbeard and Zero United.
So I just had the loan statements and outstanding principal on that, and as we know, they were charged off, I believe, in 2012, and interest was accruing, but this is just a principal balance that I was looking at.
Right, but you didn't look to see what the value of Redbeard was and the value of United was.
No, I had no idea what they would have been in June 7th, 2021.
And were you aware that he was had an equity interest in a real estate partnership that owned the PMPED law firm building in Hampton?
I became aware when I saw he was paid out of that account at the end in October, I believe. And then I would see occasionally, I called them rent checks. I think every month or so he would get a few thousand from that ownership.
But in your testimony of sort of a snapshot on June 7th, you didn't take into account the value of his interest in the PMPED law firm building, did you?
So I was looking at liquid assets, so would he have the ability that day to pay those amounts?
Okay. All right. And I take it then you also didn't take into account his ability to raise capital through borrowing money from Palmetto State Bank if he needed to.
So I was only looking at outstanding loans, so I can't comment whether or not he could. We know after the fact he got a loan from the bank, but at that time I wouldn't know what he's eligible for or not eligible for if he wanted to take out an additional loan.
Well, we know before the fact that he had never been turned down for a loan at Palmetto State Bank, correct?
To my knowledge, no.
Right. And we know before the fact that he had paid Palmetto State Bank in over $4 million in interest payments. Don't we know that?
I've not calculated that myself, but if that's what you're representing.
Well, we know before the fact that the chairman of the board of Palmetto State Bank's position was if Alec Murdaugh wants a loan from the bank, we'll make it happen. You're aware of that, aren't you?
That's my understanding.
So there was no, and just to be clear, you weren't telling the jury that on June 7th, Mr. Murdaugh's financial freight train was about to go off to the ravine. That's not what you were telling this jury, is it?
I was just looking at the account balances, outstanding loans, the fact that money had to be borrowed to pay back the Chris Wilson fees.
And he borrowed money from his partner, Johnny Parker, is that right?
That's correct.
And you know before the fact that Mr. Parker frequently loaned money to other partners in the firm because the cash flow in their business was, not great until the end of the year.
I know Johnny Parker loaned Alex money. I'm not sure about the other partners, but you are correct. He did loan him money.
Now, in your analysis of the $792,000, you testified that that a large percent of the money went to associates, and then the rest went to pay credit card bills, right?
Generally speaking, without getting into a granular level.
Sure. Well, can you generally tell me approximately how much money of the $792,000 was sent to Curtis Eddie Smith?
From my tracing, approximately $500,000.
Of the 792?
Of the 792, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. 1 second, Your Honor.
You're direct.
Mr. Bernie, you indicated that you were looking at liquid assets on June 7th, 2021. Is that correct?
That is.
Did I understand your testimony a moment ago correctly that that's what you were looking at?
Yes.
Mr. Bernie, do you own a home?
I do.
So you've gone through the process of purchasing land before, is that correct?
A couple of times, yes, sir.
A couple times. When you were buying, or let me rephrase my question here, did you ever sell any real estate?
I have once.
Was it an instant process, or did it take some time?
It took months.
Months.
From listing to closing, yes.
So, did you get the money for your real estate right when you sold it, or did it take all the way to closing to get that money?
Took all the way to closing.
So if Mr. Murdaugh needed money from his real estate interests through sell, would that have taken some time?
I imagine, yes.
Did I hear you correctly a moment ago in your testimony or acknowledge in your testimony the possibility that Mr. Murdaugh paid over $4 million in interest to Palmetto State Bank on various loans.
That's what Mr. Griffin represented. I had not done the calculations myself.
As you indicated a moment ago, what was your aim again in tracing these funds?
Looking at their ultimate dispositions, where the money went to.
Did you start with particular instruments and then go from there?
I did.
And in analyzing where the funds from those instruments went, did a portion of those instruments go to loan payments
Yes.
at Palmetto State Bank?
Yes. Loan payments at Palmetto State Bank and to pay back loans from other individuals.
And did a significant portion of those funds go towards paying that $4+ million in interest to Palmetto State Bank?
Yes.
And did that represent a significant portion of where the stolen funds were ultimately disposed?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Let me step down. Your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Marion Proctor. Marion Proctor.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? All right, can you please come? Sit right up here. State your full name for the record, spell your last name, and then move the microphone where they can hear you. Okay?
I'm Marion Proctor, Proctor.
Good afternoon, Ms. Proctor.
Hi.
Go ahead and tell the jury, do you have any relationship to Maggie and Paul?
I am Maggie's sister, and Paul is my nephew.
Can you pull that mic just a little bit closer or slide your chair up just a little bit so you don't have to lean forward?
Okay.
And is that a fresh bottle of water there?
It is.
Oh, it is. That's your water?
Yes.
Go ahead and, if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself, just where you grew up, and just a little bit about yourself, so they get to know you just a little bit, please.
Okay. I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina. Maggie and I did. She was my only sibling with two parents, and we both went to college, both married, both lived in South Carolina. We've been here ever since. I'm married. I have 3 daughters, and we live in the Charleston area,
Where did Maggie go to college?
South Carolina.
Did she go somewhere else and then transfer to South Carolina?
She did.
How far apart are you and Maggie?
5 years.
And your parents, what are their names?
Terry and Kennedy.
And do y'all have any other siblings, or was it just you and Maggie?
It's just Maggie and me.
Growing up, being 7 years apart as younger folks, was that a bit of an age difference as y'all grew up?
It was. For children, that's a lot. So, I was in college. She was in high school. So we weren't super close when we were children, but later on, as our lives became more similar, we became very close.
And how long ago do you think that relationship grew very close?
When the children were little, we did a lot together. It was easy. As they got older with, their commitment, sports and things like that, it was mostly holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. And then when we both became empty nesters, we were having a really good time.
Y'all talk almost every day.
Almost every day.
Tell the jury a little bit about Maggie. How would you describe her as somebody, just so they can get an idea of who she was?
Maggie was sweet, She was kind of a free spirit. She was always up for anything that was going on. She loved her family. She loved her boys. Buster and Paul were her world. She loved my parents. We, joked how we would grow old together and take care of them. And she was just a really, really good person.
Was Maggie a tomboy at all, or was she more of a girl's girl?
No, she was definitely a girl's girl, but she made the best of having two boys. She was right in there fishing, hunting. She didn't grow up doing that. We used to laugh that she'd get in the deer stand with her Southern Living magazine, and the boys would tell her she was making too much noise turning the pages. And then, fishing, she loved going out on the boat. She loved being at the beach. She loved going to the islands. I don't know that she really fished that much, but she just wanted to do what they were doing. She wanted to spend time with them.
What about the Gamecocks?
She was a big Gamecock fan.
Are you a Gamecock fan?
I'm a big Clemson fan.
Y'all still managed to get along, though.
We got along great. We did. And we were together a lot on those Clemson-Carolina days. And we would have a big time.
Being kind of a girl's girl, did she like spending time with you and your daughters and getting a chance to do those sorts of things?
She loved it. She and my girls loved their Aunt Maggie. She always, said that she was their favorite aunt. And she just, loved catching up on all the latest makeup and, hair trends and shoes. And she just loved doing girl stuff with us. Did
Maggie work over the years, or was she focused on taking care of the boys and raising them?
She was mostly a stay-at-home mom. She had a little shop in Hampton for a while. She and Miss Libby did that together. So that was fun. She was real involved with the boys' schools, all their sporting events. I don't think she probably ever missed one. But she was mostly a stay-at-home mom.
What about Paul? Did you get to know him, obviously, as your nephew?
Yes.
Tell the jury just a little bit about Paul and what he was like.
Paul was a sweet, sweet boy, misrepresented in the media. He had such a kind side to him. He was always wanting to help. Aunt Marion, does Uncle Bart need some wood? He'd bring us a load of wood. He was a kind soul, and I loved him a lot.
Was Maggie very involved in the family finances, to your knowledge?
Not at all.
Explain to the jury a little bit, if you would.
They had a comfortable life. Maggie was happy. It wasn't a lavish life, but it was a comfortable life. And, money just, it was never an issue for her that she knew about.
That she knew about?
Right.
I think you said you don't think Maggie ever balanced a checkbook because finances wasn't.
She didn't. So I was the sister who balanced it to the penny and went crazy if I made a mistake in my checkbook. Maggie's was in the floor of her car with all of her bills thrown all over it, and she didn't. Organization was not her best skill.
Mr. Randolph, Paul's grandfather, did you know him?
I did.
And then his spouse was who?
Miss Libby.
Towards the end of Maggie and Paul's life, can you tell the jury just a little bit about Miss Libby's health?
Miss Libby had Alzheimer's, and wasn't too bad at first, but she's been declining for years. And it's real bad now. I think she stays in bed all day. She doesn't recognize her family. And she has to be helped to do everything. She can't feed herself or go to the bathroom or do anything.
Back in June of 2021, was her condition similar in that regard?
Yes.
Back in June of 2021, was Mr. Randolph suffering any health issues?
Mr. Randolph was really sick. He had lots of different things wrong with him. And I think that his days were coming close to an end.
In the days leading up to Paul and Maggie's death, had the family received some not encouraging news about Mr. Randolph's
Correct.
prognosis?
Correct. I think that they felt like everything had been done for him that could be done. And I'm not sure Mr. Randolph wanted anything else done to him either. It had been a long road for him.
Backing up a little bit, the family, Alec and Maggie's family, properties, did they have a house in Hampton at one time?
They did. They built that house.
And did they have a beach house?
They did.
And where was that?
Edisto.
And when did they get the beach house roughly? Do you recall?
Oh, gosh. I really don't know. They've had it for a long time, 15. I really don't know. I'm sorry.
And what about Moselle? They had that property as well?
Yes, Moselle was their most recent property, and it was kind of a hunting plantation type place. Great setup for hunting everything, and lots of beds for Alec to have men come out and have hunts, and not Maggie's favorite place to be, but the boys loved it.
And in the summertime, where did Maggie typically prefer to be? Edisto? Or?
She loved the beach, yes.
Are you familiar with what people refer to as the boat crash?
I am.
And to your general recollection, that happened around February of 2019?
Correct.
After the boat crash, did the family, and particularly Maggie, feel like what she felt was some sort of backlash in the community or some sort of negative reaction that bothered her?
She did. That was a devastating blow for their family. It was a horrible accident, but it was an accident. And Maggie felt like the Hampton community had turned against her. And Paul was being mistreated. People would say mean things to him, call him names, social media, inappropriate things were said to him. Inappropriate things were said to him when he went back to school. And it was very hard on the family. It was very stressful.
Is that also part of the reason that Maggie preferred staying in Edisto?
I think so, yes.
During this time period, did Maggie start looking for a house somewhere else?
She did. They sold their Hampton house. And she was looking in the Hilton Head, Bluffton area for something. She had been looking in that area for a while.
Okay. Did she find anything she liked?
She did. She found one house that she just loved, and she called me and my parents to come down and take a look at it. And I believe Alec was there too. And she really thought that they might make an offer on that house, but in the end they did not. I think Alec advised her that the timing was just not right with the boat. case going on.
The vote case going on? So we move closer to June 7th of 2021. I believe you testified that the family had received some bad prognosis on Mr. Randolph. Is that correct?
Yes. Maggie called me that day and said she was at Edisto. She had some men working on the house, and Mr. Randolph was not doing well at all, and Alec really wanted her to come home that night. She hadn't planned on it, but that he needed her to come home, and Paul was going to be there too. And I said, well, Maggie, I said, you know, Alec and his dad are super close, and that's probably what you should do. Go be with him if he needs you.
She said that Alec wanted her to come home that night?
Yes.
What was your understanding of Maggie's intent or what they were going to do that night?
I was under the impression they were going over to Alameda to visit his parents.
And that's why Alec wanted Maggie to come home?
Correct.
And that was from your conversation with her?
Yes.
She called you to let you know that that's what Alec had called her about?
Yes.
You said she was having some work done at Edisto on June 7th?
Yes, just maintenance work, getting it ready for the summer.
You encouraged her to go to Murdaugh.
I did.
Was that the last time you talked to her?
Yes. Thank you.
You all right? You remember about what time of day that was?
I think it was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I think Maggie loved to call me when she was driving. She was always driving from, you know, Moselle to Edisto to Charleston. And I think it was around 4 that afternoon.
What was the rest of your day like? Just a normal day?
Just a normal day.
Did you go to bed that evening?
Actually, we were not in bed. We were watching a movie. It was just Bart and me at home that night.
Bart and
And-
your husband? Tell me how you found out.
John, I didn't even realize this was going on. We were watching a movie, and Bart had gotten up to, I thought, go into the kitchen, and he had a text from John Marvin saying that a text from Randy, saying that there had been a tragedy, and could Bart please call him on his cell phone. He had called on Alec's cell phone, but wanted Bart to call him back on his cell phone.
So what happened?
So Bart went outside and called him, so I still didn't know anything was going on, and told him that Maggie and Paul had been shot and they were dead.
What was your reaction?
I just couldn't believe it. I didn't think it was true. I said, there has to be a mistake. I said, there's got to be some explanation. It just can't be them.
What did y'all do after that?
We gathered up our things and we went to tell my parents. And they live in Somerville. My mom had just had knee replacement surgery. So when we got to Somerville, I called and I said, Mom, we're on the way, and we've got some bad news to share, but I want to be with you. And so she was sitting in her recliner chair with her leg all bundled up, and So we got there, and both of my parents were there, and I think my mom went into shock. She couldn't be still, and she just kept making these noises, and it was just the worst.
Did you go to Moselle at any point?
We pretty much stayed with my parents all night. We went back home, showered, and then we all went to Moselle the next morning.
Over the next few days, were y'all staying back in Somerville and going to Moselle, or what were you and your parents doing in Bart?
So we had family coming in from Kentucky, and some of them were staying with me, some of them were staying with my parents, but we were in Moselle every day. We were planning the funeral, we were in Moselle every day after that until the funeral.
Did that shock of finding out last for a while?
I'm sorry,
Did that shock of finding out last for a while?
it's still hard to face.
When you got to Moselle, did you see Alec, the defendant?
I did.
Did y'all hug,
We did.
cry?
We did.
Over the course of the next couple of days, or in the aftermath, as the shock was wearing off just a little bit, did you have any conversation with Alec about what had happened?
I didn't talk to Alec a lot. Alec was just really busy, and the whole town was coming to see him, and he was very, very, very torn up. I did at one point ask him if Maggie had suffered, and he assured me that she did not. Now, I don't know that I think that's true. And I asked if Paul had suffered, and he said no. And then later I asked him, I said, Alec, do you have any idea who's done this? I said, we have got to find out who could do this. And he said that he did not know who it was, but he felt like whoever did it had thought about it for a really long time.
Whoever had done it had thought about it for a really long time. Did that strike you as odd?
I just didn't know what that meant.
Were you ever privy or have any discussion with anything Alex said about whether or not he went to the kennels that night?
I personally did not talk to him about that, but he told my mom that he had dinner with Maggie and Paul, and then he took a nap, which he did. That was kind of a routine. He would lay down on the sofa at night after work and take a nap.
But he said he never went to the kennels.
Correct.
After your conversation with Maggie, your last conversation with her, did it strike you as odd that she didn't go to the kennels or go to Alameda with Alec?
Yes,
And why is that?
because that's the whole reason she went home that night.
Did you think from your conversation with Maggie that she was planning to see Mr. Randolph too?
I thought so. I didn't realize that Mr. Randolph wasn't there at the time.
That was a surprise to you? In the days and weeks following Maggie and Paul's murder, did Alec ever say anything about the boat case?
we would talk about the boat case. And he was very intent on clearing Paul's name.
What did he say?
He said that his number one goal was clearing Paul's name. And I thought that was so strange because my number one goal was to find out who killed my sister and Paul.
But that wasn't Alex's concern, main concern?
I know he must have wanted that too, but it just, I don't know how he could have thought about anything else.
But he talked about the boat case. You ever act scared or afraid that the real killers were out there somewhere or anything like that, or was he concerned with the boat case?
We were afraid. We didn't know what was going on. My family was scared. I was scared for Alec and Buster. I felt like they needed protection. I think everybody was afraid. And Alec didn't seem to be afraid.
Did he also talk about getting Buster back into law school
Yes.
after the murders? Maggie loved those dogs, didn't she?
She did.
She liked going down there and playing with them.
She did.
Would she tend to walk down there, or would she take another way to get down?
If she was dieting, she'd walk. Sometimes she'd ride her bicycle, and she'd take her car. She'd go, just whatever she felt like. Take her car, take one of the golf cart things.
She wasn't a hunter, though, was she?
No.
What'd she think about those AR-style guns that the boys had?
She seemed to be fine with those. I remember when she wanted to give them those for Christmas, and I just growing up with girls and not in a hunting world, I said, Maggie, why would you give those boys those guns? And she said they love to shoot hogs, and which I understood that the hogs were tearing up their property, but it just scared me that the boys would have such a dangerous weapon. But I know nothing about guns, so.
One second, Mr. Brock. Thank you for testifying. Please answer any questions the defense may have.
Mr. Griffin.
Hey. I'm sorry, this is hard for me too. Maggie was a very special person, wasn't she?
She was.
And she and Alec had a very special relationship, didn't it?
They did.
And they had a very special family, did they not?
They did.
And they loved to do things together as a family, didn't they?
They did.
And it just wasn't Alec and Maggie and Paul and Buster, but your parents were part of their family, right?
Yes.
And I doubt you've heard all the testimony here in court, but a lot of Paul's friends refer to your dad as Papa T. Is that what people refer to him as?
Yes.
And your mother as Grandma.
Yes.
And it sort of seemed like Paul and Buster's friends were part of your parents' extended family. Is that right?
Yes.
And you and your husband and Bart and your children, y'all would all vacation together with, not necessarily with Buster and Paul's friends, but with Maggie and Alec and Paul and Buster, and y'all did things as a family a lot, did you?
We
not?
did.
And Alec was really close to your parents, wasn't he?
Yes.
And he considered your dad as one of his best friends, I believe.
He was very kind to my dad.
Right. And y'all would vacation. I think you and your husband have a house in the Keys. You would vacation there, right?
Correct.
And y'all would do a lot together. You place up in off Lake Kiowee. Right.
Correct.
And you said Maggie was a girl, but she took to the boys and learned to be a mother of two rambunctious sons, right?
She did.
And you said earlier that about sporting events that Maggie never missed any of Paul and Buster's sporting events. Is that right?
Correct.
And Alec was there right by Maggie at every sporting event, wasn't he?
Coaching.
Coaching most of the time, right? The weeks leading up to the horrific day of June the 7th, you had a family get together up at Kiowee,
We did.
and your daughter was, you're having a baby shower for your daughter, right?
Right.
You're about to be a grandmother for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah. And where was it?
When was it?
Where?
Where?
Yeah.
My daughter lives in Greenville.
Okay. And and it was the weekend, I think, of May 21st.
I think it was the weekend before Memorial Day weekend.
Right. And I'm going to show you a photo and see if you recognize this photo. And it's Defendant's Exhibit 122.
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
I took that picture.
You took that picture.
I did.
Your Honor, we would introduce Defendant's 122 into evidence this time.
No objection, Your Honor.
Can you pull up 122, Doug? I'm not sure, Marion, if the jury has actually seen a picture of Maggie in this trial. She's obviously the only female here in this photo.
Mm-hmm.
And y'all favor each other greatly, right?
We do.
And this was a weekend just a couple of, I mean, you said the weekend before Memorial Day, right? And that's Buster on the left,
Yes,
and that's Paul,
right,
and then Maggie and Alex, right?
correct.
Okay. Thank you, you can take that down. Did you see Maggie again after being with her up in, above Greenville?
I did not.
So that was the last time you were together with her?
She, they were at Edisto for Memorial Day, and then the next weekend was my birthday, and we were back in the upstate. And then I got the call on Monday.
And you understand, the weekend after Memorial Day, Alec and Maggie went to Columbia for a super regional baseball game with Buster and his girlfriend Brooklyn.
Right,
You were aware of that?
I am.
And you mentioned that Maggie was a big Carolina fan and Alec was a big Carolina fan, right?
They both graduated from there.
And they went to a lot of the Carolina sporting events as a couple.
Yes.
Right. And leading up to June 7th, well, let me back up. I know we've talked about this, and I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but Maggie did a lot for Alec's mom and dad, but didn't it make her somewhat sad to go over and visit his mother because of her condition?
Absolutely.
And it was really not high on her list of things that she wanted to do.
Maggie went there a lot. She just didn't feel like she needed to go every day like Alec liked to go.
And Alec would go every day and sometimes more than once a day.
As much as he could, he did.
And but Maggie cared for Mr. Randolph, and I know she loved him. I'm talking about she would, prepare food for him and tried to spoil him, wouldn't she?
It was the no salt diet.
Right.
And they were all struggling to cook food that he would eat with no salt.
And she experimented with different things, hopefully that he would enjoy, right?
Right. The whole family was taking turns and trying to provide meals.
And you know now that on the 7th, I think in the afternoon, and we'll establish this later, but, around 4:30, Mr. Randolph got admitted back to the hospital in Savannah.
I know that now.
Right. And you said earlier that you expected from your conversation with Maggie that she was going to go over to Almeda and see Alec's parents on the evening of the 7th, but and you found it odd afterwards when you found out she didn't.
Correct.
But knowing that Alec's dad was not there and he was back in the hospital, it doesn't really seem that odd anymore, does it?
Probably not. You and Bart received
awful phone call on the night of the 7th about Maggie and Paul's death, right?
We did.
And it was from John Marmon.
Randy.
Randy.
Sorry, I misspoke earlier.
And one of the requests was that you and Bart go and tell your parents in person, right?
Well, I don't know that they requested, but I knew we had to do that in person.
So you did that in person.
Yes.
And then the next day, you came to Moselle with your parent.
Correct.
And Alex, was he grieving greatly?
Oh, terribly.
I mean, people have
We were all-
described him as being destroyed. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes.
And Buster was there?
Yes.
And I jumped ahead, but leading up, Maggie enjoyed being at Edisto over Moselle in the summertime.
Correct. I think most people would.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it a lot more than being at Moselle.
Right.
But Alec had to stay at Moselle, or did stay at Moselle, because his work was right there in Hampton, right?
Right.
And Alec was constantly wanting Maggie to come back and stay with him at Moselle, wasn't he?
Perhaps. I'm not sure. I don't think he really liked being by himself.
But when he asked Maggie to come back on the 7th, I mean, you didn't think that was really an unusual request, because he wanted to be with Maggie
Right.
and didn't
No,
like to be by himself.
I did not think it was unusual, and that's why I encouraged her to do so.
And you, from your conversation with Maggie, you knew that Paul was going to be there,
Correct.
right? And do you know why Paul was going to be there? Had you heard?
I didn't know at the time. I know now.
That's but anyway, and you encouraged Maggie to go be with Alec, because you know his dad was in bad shape.
Right.
Now, after Maggie and Paul were murdered, Mr. Randolph died 2 days later, I believe, or 3 days. So it was a very difficult time for everyone, wasn't it?
Very.
And there were 2 funerals, one on a Saturday for Maggie and Paul, and one on Sunday for Mr. Randolph, right? And then after a day or so, did Alec and Buster come to Somerville and stay with your parents?
Yes.
And did they stay with your parents a lot after the murders?
Yes, especially Ellie.
Yeah, Alec. And to your knowledge, did Alec ever spend another night at Moselle after the murders?
He did not.
She stayed with your parents. He visited with you and your husband and family down at Key West at sometime in the end of July. Is that right?
He did.
And then he and Buster came up to Greenville at one point in time.
They did.
And then and he was staying with his brother Randy at times. He was all over the place.
He was.
And, now you mentioned that after the murders that Alex said that he was very intent on clearing Paul's name from the voting accident, right? And you knew that that Maggie felt very strongly that Paul was not driving the boat when the beautiful Mallory Beach came to her tragic death, right?
Correct.
I mean, Maggie was adamant. She was on a mission to clear Paul's name, was she not?
Sort of.
Sort of. And she was, and you're not critical of Alex for wanting to clear Paul's name after he was murdered, do you? Are you?
I'm not critical about that at all. I think that was his way of honoring Paul after he was gone. I just thought his priority should have been focusing on finding out who killed Maggie and Paul.
And how do you know that wasn't a priority for him?
We never talked about it. We never talked about finding the person who could have done it. It was just odd. And we were sort of living in fear because we thought this horrible person was out there, and we were mostly afraid for Alec and Buster, but we didn't know the motive behind the killings. We thought it probably had something to do with the vote case.
Right.
And we thought that up until September.
Right.
And then things started to change a little bit.
Sure. Well, were you aware that Alec started carrying a gun after the murder? You didn't know
Alec
that?
always carried a gun.
What's that?
He always carried a gun.
On his person that he started carrying a gun. Were you aware of that?
I knew he usually had one in his car.
Right. I want to ask you just some sort of one topic kind of questions. Bubba was Maggie and Alec's dog, is that right? Bubba could be a little hard-headed, we've heard. But
I'm sorry. Yes,
Yes.
Bubba. I think Bubba could be a handful.
But it's pretty clear that Alec could control Bubba pretty well.
Yes.
And Maggie enjoyed going down to the kennels, as far as you know, to play with the dogs.
She did.
Right. And she was a dog lover,
She was.
and you're a dog lover,
I am.
and you'll have dogs. You know that they didn't allow dogs in the house at Moselle
Correct.
because of I don't know.
Allergies.
Yeah, allergies.
Right.
And-
But they had a big porch, and there were dog beds all outside on the porch, and
Right.
huge buckets of water. And when I was there, the dogs were always up there at the house.
Did you know there was an electric fence around?
I did not know that there was an electric fence, but
And did Maggie and Alec let dogs in the house down at Edison?
I don't think so. They stayed mostly underneath the house. She
They
had
had
a
like
pen,
Right.
big pen down there.
So they had a dog run type thing underneath the house?
Yes.
And did you ever go to Edisto and visit with
Yes.
Maggie and Alec and their family?
Yes.
And would Paul's friends and Buster's friends welcome at
Always.
Edisto and at Moselle?
Yes.
And
Maggie loved having the boys' friends around.
And I think you mentioned this, but Moselle, was Moselle Paul's passion?
Yes,
He loved that place?
yes,
And Alec enjoyed being there with Paul? Is that
yes, he did.
right? And, one second, Your Honor. Just very briefly, in your own words, you tell the jury what you believe Alec's relationship was with Paul.
I think they had a very good relationship. They loved all the same things. They loved to hunt, they loved to fish, they loved to work the land. I think the plan was for Paul to take over Moselle one day. And they had a great father-son relationship.
And in your own words, can you tell the jury what do you believe Alec's relationship with Maggie was?
It was good. It wasn't perfect, but Maggie was happy. And I think she was happy.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Read that right.
May it please the court, Your Honor. When Maggie called you on the afternoon of June 7th, 2021, she reported to you that her whole purpose for going home was to go with Alec to visit Alameda. Is that correct?
Objection, leading.
What did Maggie tell you her whole purpose was in going home and Alec wanting her to come home on June 7th, 2021?
She was going home to be with Alec and visit his parents at Alameda.
And it was such a point of contention that you actually encouraged her to go.
I did.
You were asked some questions about you testified about Alec not being focused on trying to figure out who killed Maggie and Paul, and then something happened in September. Is that right?
Correct.
And that changed for you as you started to look at the motive. Is that correct? That's what you just testified, correct?
Correct.
And in September, he got fired from the law firm, right?
Correct.
And it started to come out about years and years of theft and misappropriation from clients. Is that correct?
Objection, leading.
Objection sustained.
What came out in September that changed your calculus?
And objection exceeding the scope of cross.
Objections overruled.
Please answer the question.
We were on our way to a football game, and we received a phone call from a friend of ours saying how sorry they...
This issue that has not been ruled upon.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have you go to the jury room. Please do not discuss the case. Nature of the objection.
Your Honor, she was about to testify that she had heard about the roadside shooting. The state has not gone into the roadside shooting yet. Your Honor's not ruled on whether that's admissible or not. We object to under 403 as to being admissible. And substantively, that is the objection, evidence of the roadside shooting. It just opens up a whole new avenue of issues Secondly, what she knows thus far would be hearsay, which is a technical objection, but certainly we object to any evidence of the roadside shooting.
Your Honor, at this point, of course, this is responsive to a question that was raised on cross-examination by Mr. Griffin, in which he testified something happened in September. So for that reason, just to begin with, I believe that door is opened as to her to explain what it was that changed at that period in time, which was the nature of my question to her. Additionally, I think if we look beyond that, there is a connection, if we want to talk and have in-camera hearing about her answer and about 403 and 404, there is a logical connection between what happened in the roadside shooting and what happened on June 7th, 2021. And that connection is, of course, that the evidence will show that as the temperature increases, as there's a confrontation for Alec Murdaugh, then things like this happen. And that's what happened on September. But as it relates to this specific witness, this was an answer that came up during the defense cross, and it's fair to explore with this witness now what changed in September, which she's already testified to from a defense question.
And what was the question that prompted the response that you now indicate opens the door for this? Yes.
So in that particular question and in her response, he asked her, and he had been, of course, engaging in great detail about the family relationship and that sort of thing, and put up a picture and all the rest of it, and asked her about her assessment at that particular time, and she went in and started to explain that, and he was specifically asking about Alec being concerned about clearing Paul's name in the boat case, and then she explained further that, and he asked her if that was any big deal, and then she went on to explain her answer, and that's when she talked about how everything changed in September, and that was what I was exploring, what happened in September, which has been testimony before this jury, and I think now fair game for them to understand what happened in September.
All right. Yes, sir.
Your Honor, that was not the question.
What was the question? That was my question to Mr. Waters, and he's explained a whole lot. I don't know if he responded to my question. Maybe you will. What was the question that you posed that generated the response about her concern and her concerns changing?
The question that I asked related to her, I said, you testified previously that you didn't believe Alec was concerned about finding out who did this, or more concerned about clearing Paul's name, and then she says, well, it seemed odd he wasn't concerned about finding out who did this, and I said, why do you think he was not concerned? And then she goes into testifying, well, initially we thought it was the boating accident, and then after September, we thought perhaps it's something completely different. And I mean, I was exploring her testimony on direct, and she offered up the issue of the roadside shooting. So I didn't ask anything about the roadside shooting, Your Honor. I was asking her why she thought Alec was not trying to, what was the basis of her belief that Alec wasn't trying to find out who did this?
Mr. Waters.
And I apologize if I wasn't more clear. I don't remember the specific question, but what I do...
Court reporters, if we'll have Ms. Harris, if you'll go back a bit to Mr. Griffin and his questioning of Ms. Proctor. Solely consumed about the, I don't know how far that was, Maggie being consumed about the boating accident, and if it's not too far back from there on up to where you are now. And if you need a break, we can take one for you to locate it.
I'm looking for the question.
All right.
You're not critical about Alex wanting to clear Paul's name.
You need to be loud enough for me to hear you at least. Go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, yes, sir. Okay. You're not critical about Alex wanting to clear Paul's name. After he was murdered, are you? I am not critical about that at all. I think that was his way of honoring Paul after he was gone. I just thought his priority should have been focusing on finding out who killed Maggie and Paul. And how do you know that wasn't a priority? We never talked about it. We never talked about finding the person who could have done it. It was just odd. And we were sort of living in fear because we thought this horrible person was out there and we didn't. We were mostly afraid for Alex and Buster. We didn't know the motive behind the killings. We thought it was probably had something to do with the boat case, right? And we thought that up until September. All right. And then things started to change a little bit. Were you aware that Alex started carrying a gun?
All right, Mr. Waters.
Your Honor, again, these were in direct responses to his question as he was exploring her statement about his concern on the boat case. And in fact, the reference to September was actually in response to a follow-up question that the defense continued down that line of questioning. That answer has now come out, and I think that the witness, again, is entitled and is fair game at this point before you.
Testify as to what changed in September?
What she meant by that. Yes, sir, what she meant by that.
And what changed in September?
Do you want me to talk to them?
Yes.
So we received a phone call from a friend of ours who said he was so sorry to hear about my brother-in-law. And the call came in to my husband, Bart, and Bart said, "What are you talking about? We don't know anything." And he said, "Well, your brother-in-law's been shot." And we literally stopped the car, pulled over on the side of the road, and it was just the worst feeling in the world because I thought whoever had killed Maggie and Paul had now shot Alec, and I was horrified that Buster was next. So we made a phone call to Buster, and Buster said his dad had been shot, but that he was okay. He was on his way or in the hospital at that time, I can't remember. And then at some point, and I'm not sure, I think I was in shock. At some point, we spoke with Jim Griffin that day, and he told us that yes, Alec had been shot, that he had been fired from the law firm because he had been caught stealing money.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Again, that's her explanation, and I believe that's fair game in this particular instance to this particular witness's testimony that had come out on cross-examination. And I probably would have one follow-up additionally I should mention as well. I think there's two other matters that probably we should explore while the jury's out, in fairness to the other side and in court, that I wanted to inquire that were in reference to cross-examination. Those are different issues. I was going
into them, tell me what they are, so.
Sure. There were Obviously, extensive cross-examination about the family relationship, and there's been extensive evidence offered by the defense on the cross about the family relationship. And there were two questions I was going to ask her about fidelity concerns, and also the Maggie and the family wrestling with opioid abuse and pill usage by the defendant. Both of those have been issues that Maggie had wrestled with and had expressed to her.
All right, Mr. Griffin.
Well, as to the, I don't know if you want me to address the roadside shooting, but that certainly, I mean, that opens up Pandora's box of 404B. They want to introduce the roadside shooting as motive. How can you have motive after the fact? And so it's not admissible. It should not be admissible under 403. But just what she says is not that harmful, but they're not going to stop there, Your Honor. And I did not open the door. I said,
You're probing her about Alex's fear. Doesn't Alex, were you aware that he started carrying a gun? Well, he always carries a gun in his car. No, but then he started carrying it in his pockets. So you're having her, cross-examining her to suggest that Alex was living in fear, as evidenced by the fact that he continued or started carrying a gun, not in his vehicle, but on his person. And she, in her response, says, well, I never, didn't appear to me that he was living in fear. I didn't know anything about that and responding to you until in September when this occurred for whatever reason. Now, what the truth of what occurred, she's not testifying as an investigator. She said she heard he'd been shot. And that gave her, changed her reason for concern in some way, whatever that might be, I don't know. Did you still have a reason for concern, or you, about Alex's safety, or did it, was it changed, was it altered?
That day, and for some time after that, we were very concerned for the family. We felt like someone was after them, but then we started finding out about other things that had been going on in Alex's life. And
this is in part based on your conversation with Mr. Griffin?
This is everything that has come out since then.
Did you say that you had a conversation with Mr. Griffin?
That day that we found out that Alec had been shot, we did have a conversation with Mr. Griffin, and he's the one.
Mr. Griffin told you that he'd been fired and that he'd been caught stealing money.
Correct.
so that's just hearsay.
Well,
Absolutely hearsay.
what kind of quandary does that put you in? You're going to be a witness as well?
Well, that's a hearsay statement, Your Honor. Without a doubt, it's classic hearsay.
The basis for her fear or not having fear, which is something you, or fear or believing that Alex was in fear, that's something that you were probing. Aside from that issue, how about the family relationship issue, fidelity, opioid abuse, concerns?
Your Honor, with regard to fidelity, I mean, we can hear what she says about it, but the evidence, as I understand it, is 10 or 15 years ago. I don't know how long ago, but it was more than 10 years ago. There was some issue about someone that Alec had known in college reaching out to him. Maggie got angry about that. They had a
Reaching out to him 15 years ago or recently?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that Maggie got angry about it, contacted the woman's husband, who says, It's not true. I know who she's seeing because I have a private eye on her. That led to a divorce.
You're now referring to a 15-year-old conversation.
Yes. And then the opioid stuff, Your Honor, is, I'm not sure what information she's going to share about that, frankly.
Well, you had one earlier witness read a letter about him being in rehab
That they introduced, yes, sir.
that you published.
It was already in evidence, Your Honor.
All right.
Over objection.
Go ahead, Mr. Waters.
So on both of those issues, first of all, with the first,
By the way, you can step down for a break. Don't discuss your case. You're fine? Okay, good. All right.
with the issue of the first matter, I think it's certainly a fair question to say, did Maggie ever express to you any concerns? Were there ever any concerns and issues with the defendant's fidelity? I think that's clearly in response to the extensive evidence been offered by the defense.
You said, has she ever, such as 15 years ago?
Well, I think that my follow-up question would be, was that something that remained in Maggie's mind over the years up until...
And she would know that.
I think that if I asked her that question, she could express an answer to that. Yes, sir.
No? What is the answer to that?
It was an affair that happened, or Maggie thought it was an affair that happened many years ago. They were able to resolve the issues, but Maggie still brought it up.
As recently as when?
A year ago. She did not think anything was going on. It still bothered her.
All right.
Follow-up, Your Honor?
Yes.
During when that event occurred, did she make Alec leave the household for a period of time?
She did.
Frame when this happened. I mean,
I understand. 15 years ago, or?
How long ago was that?
It was a very long time ago. I'm not sure. A very long time ago.
I think, again, I'm not trying to make it bigger than it is, but I think given the issues that have been squarely in front of the jury, the state's entitled, at least in a limited fashion, to offer this some testimony in this regard that that everything was not perfect, as the defense has repeatedly elicited. And so on that particular issue, I only propose a limited question that had Maggie ever had any concerns about fidelity, and had those concerns continued to bother her, and that would be the extent of my proposed examination of her on that issue.
All right. Anything else?
it's 2007 is our understanding. 2007, 15 years ago.
Well, yeah, 2007 was 15 years ago, yeah.
And that's when it occurred.
Well, that's been established. Give me something new,
Well, so
other than repeating 15 years ago.
it's not admissible under 403. Unfair prejudice outweighs the probative value of this. Whether it still bothered her, I mean, she testified that they weren't without their problems like all married couples, but they had a good marriage. I mean, it's been addressed, and it's highly inflammatory.
That's why your questions have to not lead into things that might be inflammatory. We're going to be in recess for about 15 minutes. Please. the witness can testify as to her concern as to what occurred on September 7th that changed her concern about Alex living in fear. She cannot testify as to on the fidelity issue because that's too remote in time and would tend to confuse the jury. She can testify that she discovered that he'd been fired and that and that he had a drug problem.
Your Honor, depending on how the testimony goes, we would have hearsay objections if she's testifying as to what someone told her.
She's not testifying as to the truth of it. She's responding to why her concerns were changed based on, in part, of her conversations with you.
No, I understand
As an
that.
agent for Mr. Murdaugh.
No, I understand that. My point I just stood to address is the family wrestling with opioid and pill use by the defendant. That is hearsay. If that's how she knows.
She already had a drug problem. I mean, if you want to talk about specifically, I don't know to what degree she discovered his drug problem, opioid addiction, or whatever it is, but it's already in evidence anyway.
No, I understand. I'm just advising the court that I will be making hearsay objections if that's
Yes,
she's
I
testifying about
understand.
hearsay.
Anything else before the jury comes?
Nothing from the state this time, Your Honor.
All right, bring the jury. All these issues. The objection is overruled. You may continue.
May it please the court, Your Honor. Ms. Proctor, when we left on the break, I was asking you what happened in September that caused you to change your assessment. Can you describe that to the jury, please?
On September 4th, we were headed to a football game, and my husband Bart received a phone call from a friend saying he was so sorry to hear about what had happened to my brother-in-law. And we had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, well, we've heard, he told us he had been shot. So we pulled over on the side of the road. We were all in hysterics. We called Buster, and Buster said yes, that his dad had been shot, that he was being airlifted to the hospital, that they thought hoped he was going to be okay. So we wanted more information, so we called Jim Griffin, and he told us that Alec had been shot in the head and that he had been fired from his law firm for stealing.
What was your concern when you heard that he had been shot?
Initially, I thought he might be dead. I had just lost 2 of the family members, and I felt like they were being targeted at that point. I felt like the family was being targeted.
Subsequent to that, did your concern that the family was being targeted, did that change as well?
Over the course of a few weeks, we were still on high alert, worried for Buster, but at that point, information started coming out about some things that Alec had done financially that we had no idea about.
And that changed your assessment about what you heard about him being shot as well, is that correct? Can you answer out loud?
The shooting, that was an event in itself. The roadside shooting.
You just stated that the shooting itself, the roadside shooting, was an event in itself. Did other information come to your attention that changed your assessment about the roadside shooting at a later time?
Yes.
And changed that initial concern that Alec was somehow being targeted?
Yes.
Did Maggie have a nickname for Paul?
As little, what is detective?
Little Detective? And what did that mean?
She felt like that he was always looking to make sure his dad was behaving.
And what specifically was the concern?
Pills, prescription pain pills.
And had Maggie expressed to you concern over time about the defendant's pill usage?
Yes.
And how long had that been going on?
I am not sure, but I think it had been going on for some time.
And did that concern continue up until recent times as we moved to their Maggie and Paul's murder?
Yes.
And what did specifically Little Detective mean as it related to the pills?
If there were pills in the house that his dad was taking that he wasn't supposed to, Paul was determined that he would find them.
And did that happen on occasions?
I think so, yes.
Hold on for me 1 second. What specifically changed your perception of the roadside shooting after your initial concern?
The story that was initially told about what happened came to not be true.
The story told by who? By
Alec?
Alec? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Anything further? Thank you. You may step down. I'll call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Bart Proctor.
Raise your right hand, left down on the Bible, please. Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God? I do. All right, if you would please, sir, sit in that chair over there, state your full name for the record, spell your last name, and then speak into the mic.
My name is Barton Proctor, Proctor.
Proctor, good afternoon. Very quickly tell the jury, are you Marion Proctor's husband?
For 37 years.
For 7 years. And obviously, over the years, as being part of this family, have you gotten to know Maggie and gotten to know Paul and gotten to know the defendant, Alec Murdaugh?
I have.
I don't want to belabor the points, but in the aftermath of Maggie and Paul's murder, were you also privy to some of the conversations that Alec had that your wife related to this jury today?
Yes.
And ultimately heard the same thing in those conversations that she related here today?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to review what's been entered into evidence as States 297, the kennel video?
I have heard it.
May I have the computer input, please?
It was on there.
For the record, I'm going to play States 297.
Get up. Get up. Quit, Cash. Quit. It's okay. Come here. Come here. Shit. Cash. Hey, he got purses now. Hang on, Bubba. It's a kitty. This is a chicken. Come here, Cash. Cash. Quit.
Do you recognize any voices on that video?
I recognize 3.
Can you tell the jury what voices you recognize?
I recognize Paul Murdaugh. I recognize Maggie Murdaugh, and I recognize Alec Murdaugh.
And when you say Alec Murdaugh, do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you point him out for the jury, please?
Yes,
Or
sir.
describe him.
He's wearing a blue blazer and has his glasses on his head.
And how sure are you?
100%.
Thank you. Please answer any questions the defense may have.
Hey, Mr. Proctor. Were you ever shown a blue raincoat by any SLED agents?
Yes, sir.
And was that blue raincoat shown to you and your wife Marion, who just was here in the courtroom?
Yes, sir. It was a picture.
A picture of the blue raincoat. And did you recognize the blue raincoat?
No, sir.
Had you ever seen it before?
No, sir.
Did you ever see Paul wear it? The blue raincoat?
I had never recognized it before.
Okay, all right. That's all the questions I have, Your Honor.
Anything further?
Say, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. We have another witness today?
Your Honor, as you're aware, there was a circumstance beyond any party's control. No, because of a circumstance beyond the party's control.
Very good. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, there are no more witnesses available today, and this is Valentine's Day. So we will recess at this time and resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Have a good evening. Mr. Waters, the jury is gone. You can further explain if you'd like. You can further explain.
The issue with the scheduling? Yes, sir. There's witnesses that are coming forward. There's a unavoidable, unfortunate personal event that has arisen that unfortunately has affected that witness's availability, Your Honor, and so that's why we had requested, we are late in the day, but had requested a recess for the day. Your Honor, I will say that with the side of the road issue has always been out there. And at this point, we believe there is some admissibility as to that, particularly a statement of the defendant related to that, in which there's actually a few statements, but there's one statement in particular. I don't know if Your Honor wants to proffer that at this particular time, since we have a little time available outside the jury's presence, but I do think that at some point that's a bridge, given developments, that needs to be crossed.
Yes, sir.
We've prepared a memo. We would be prepared to argue that motion, but we're not today. So we expected this to go through, no motion to be argued today. I apologize to the court, but we would prefer not to go forward with it today.
You said you're preparing or have prepared a memo?
Let me ask the person preparing it.
Stop the jury and have them come at another time if need be, 10 o'clock, 10:30, whatever.
Your Honor, we're not done with that. We were hoping, we were not anticipating it coming up at all.
Can you all don't leave with the jury yet, if you can find out, are they gone or still here? You have them hold for a moment.
You have completed the memo, filed it, Your Honor has it on the 404B issue. There's a section on the roadside.
Has it been sent to me or is it being sent to
It was,
Your Honor, it was filed well before trial, and it's a consolidated memo. It addresses all the 404B stuff, the financial evidence that you've ruled in, and in the section of the memo, we do address the roadside shooting. We point out that it's after June 7th. We point out that he's been indicted for insurance fraud. As a result of that, attempted insurance fraud, their theory of motive is it is just another way for him to gain sympathy when financial situations turn badly for him. But we point out that he has been indicted by Hampton County grand jury for insurance fraud for attempted suicide to obtain $12 million of insurance for his son Buster. And so we argue that it's not motive, and it should not be admissible under 403 as well.
All right, and I'm happy to talk about all of that and review what's been submitted overnight and review whatever the state may have for me to consider and to hear any more argument about it in the morning prior to ruling. I've had them to stop the jury from leaving to find out how much time you all might need tomorrow morning, because otherwise I've told them to be here at 9:30. If they need to come at 10 o'clock, 10:30, Mr. Harpootlian.
Your Honor, I don't think this will take 30 minutes to argue that. We prefer to argue it in the morning simply because we haven't looked at it, and while Mr. Griffin is an extraordinary advocate, I'd like an opportunity to.
Want the jury to come in at 10?
10 would be great.
I would say 10:30 to be safe, Your Honor.
Why I'd argued against that, I'm trying to think of a reason, but I really can't.
So we're going to have the jury come in at 10:30 tomorrow morning instead of 9:30. Thank you. All right. In the interim, however, if you all have something you want me to read overnight, early in the morning, happy to receive it.
Yes, sir.
I have what was previously filed now, defendant's memorandum in opposition to motion in limine re-evidence of other crimes and bad acts, and I've ruled on a majority of this already.
We may polish that up a little bit tonight, and if so, we'll email it to your law clerk, and she, I'm sure, will get it to you.
Page 9 starts the roadside shooting discussion.
Our conditional motion, Your Honor, in the reply also touched this ground as well, but we can do the same thing.
Middle of page 9 through the top of page 12, so you have about 2.5 pages that you might want to, if you want to supplement it, it'd be fine.
Thank you.
If you want to. And how about from the state's perspective?
Yes, sir, Your Honor, and I think I just lost my glasses. Put them up. Your Honor, if you look at our response in opposition that was filed on December 8th, we, on page 19, in the factual recitation, we talk about specifically the shooting on the side of the road in response to the confrontation with Chris Wilson. And then, of course, from that point on, and prior to that, there is analysis, general analysis on 404 and 403. I believe our reply, which I'm trying to put my hands on, also addresses those issues, but we can also polish up some things as well. For Your Honor, there is, thank you, Mr. James. There is, starting at page 15 in the reply, it is addressed as well, the reply to their response or in that particular series of filings. It's in there, and again, we can polish that up. There is, again, there's a recorded interview and a recorded statement that we certainly can provide to Your Honor for review, that ultimately we believe they're statements of the defendant, of course, that we believe would be admissible under the theories as argued there.
And what is the state's theory of admissibility of the roadside shooting?
Yes, sir, Your Honor. As we argued back in December, and as argued in those particular briefs, what we see is a chain of circumstances that are connected for an extended period of time that particularly highlight and start in June 7th. We've gone into, obviously, Your Honor, moving into the financial situation as it went into July and the efforts to shore up that particular money, the loans. Mr. Burney testified to that today. But of course, Mr. Murdaugh, there's already been evidence admitted that he was $192,000 short, and that Chris Wilson covered that. The evidence goes on that in that particular interim of time, and again with the state's theory, that he's able to do his best to try to cover things up in that interim period. But then everything comes to a head, as already been testified to, in September 4th. Chris Wilson, of course, has also already testified that that particular day, on September 4th, that he finally got the defendant to agree to meet with him and confronted him about that 192, which again is right at the heart of the Ferris feeds, which are right at the heart of June 7th, 2021. And I had that confrontation with him. The admissions that were made have already been testified to. And then with a short period of time, in response to that, that the side of the road shooting happened. You've already heard testimony here from Ms. Proctor that, of course, the initial reaction of everyone is, oh my gosh, the real killers are back. And that's precisely, under the state's theory, the effect that the defendant intended. And there will be, from these recorded statements, ultimately evidence offered that that was not true, and he had told lies, Your Honor, about that particular. And that would be the recorded statement that we would offer about when he admitted that he had been untruthful to law enforcement about the circumstances of that shooting. I don't intend to go into great detail about that. I'm just trying to get from point A to point B and then get out. I'm not trying to use the term that I've used before, gild the lily.
The statement that you referenced, that you say you want to put in, a recorded statement?
That's correct, Your Honor. Yes, sir.
What's the length of that recorded statement?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's less than 15 minutes, Your Honor.
No, it's longer than that, no more than 30. Mr. Griffin and I were there when he gave the recorded statement. We called them to give the recorded statement.
And the gist of the recorded statement is what, Mr.
Your Honor, okay, so Mr. Murdaugh had somebody shoot him in the head on the roadside to get to have a $10 or $12 million insurance policy paid to his son Buster. Now, he believed it was suicide contestability cause, so he had somebody shoot him in the head. No question they shot him in the head. No question the intent was to kill him. He fractured his skull, had a brain bleed, was airlifted to Savannah Hospital. It didn't kill him. He intended to die. And the recorded statement, he immediately went to detox because he was planning to go to detox anyway. Mr. Griffin and I went down to Atlanta. We met with him in detox. He'd been through a horrible experience, shot in the head, and then detox. And we informed him the police were looking for whoever shot him. And he, at that point, said, look, this is what happened. And I don't want them wasting, and literally he said, I don't want them wasting resources trying to solve this shooting when those resources could be used to find who killed Maggie and Paul. We picked up the phone. We called SLED. We put him on the phone with SLED to have him explain exactly what happened. This wasn't a result of a SLED interrogation. This was a voluntary statement. So they quit wasting resources looking for, and he told them who shot him in the head, and a guy named Eddie Smith, who was his drug dealer. So that's...
And you all have brought his name up a couple of times through cross-examination.
Yes.
Is he on the state's witness list?
Yes, Your Honor. But, Your Honor, one aspect of that, and I think this is what highlights the relevance and the connection with this particular case, is that in the wake of the side of the road shooting, Mr. Murdaugh's initial claim was that some unknown individual had a flat tire, and some unknown individual, supposedly under the guise of stopping for help, then suddenly shot him in the head. He went so far as to draw have with a composite artist to draw a composite photograph. Again, I'm not trying to get into too much of the detail, but that, of course, the immediate effect of that is that he's been targeted by some unknown individual. That was a complete lie, and that's the point of that statement.
If the issue here is that Mr. Murdaugh lies, I mean, really, are we at that? I mean, we've come $10 million through lies, and now this piece of evidence becomes relevant because it proves he lied again months after the murder. There's no, he didn't do it, and I think they will concede he didn't do it to get some sort of sympathy. He did it to be dead. That's why he did it. And unfortunately, Eddie Smith, at 4 feet, couldn't shoot somebody in the head and kill him. He meant to.
And that's what Mr. Smith would say?
Well, Mr. Smith has given no less, I'm set up to cross-examine him, I know this, 6 different explanations for that and any other event you ask him about, from wasn't there to I was there and I saw Alec, he'd been shot, to I was there and I tried to stop Alec, to yes, I shot him in the head. But the fact of the matter is, the cross-examination of Mr. Smith is something I'm looking forward to now. But this particular event had nothing to do with what happened on June 7, other than he lied about something else. And 404, unless there's a specific, it's not motive. I mean, I don't understand what the 404, 403 analysis would be on this. I know what the 403 analysis is. The prejudice outweighs the probative. The 404 is what of the 4 things that 404 is admitted for, which one is this?
Your Honor.
We're going to argue it in the morning, so this is just a prelude to tomorrow morning.
2 things. 2 things. If Mr. Harpootlian wishes to stipulate in front of the jury that his client is a liar, the state's willing to accept that stipulation.
And not go forward with this?
The second thing is, Your Honor, is that what actually happened on the side of the road is not what's important to this particular case. What is important, Your Honor, is that it's in reaction to the confrontation with Chris Wilson about the fares fees that came to the head on June 7th, 2021, and it's about what the defendant said, that he was attacked by an unknown assailant as he was trying to change a tire, and went so far as to do a composite drawing, and it created the effect, as this investigation had gone on, that, oh my gosh, the real killers are back to finish the job. And that's precisely what he intended, and he ultimately admitted that was a lie. So the circumstances of what happened on the side of the road are not what the state is focused on. What is important is what the defendant said, how he attempted to use that, and that it was actually a falsehood. And you heard Ms. Proctor testify, it had that exact effect, that, oh my gosh, the real killers are back.
But I think the state will concede his object on the side of the road was to be dead. That's what the act was, to kill himself. Now, what happened after that? After he was taken to Savannah and had a brain bleed and a fractured skull, and when he came out of all that and realized, I'm not dead. How is that relevant to June 7? Your Honor, we can beat this dead horse a little bit more in the morning, but allow us to give you, I don't know, this crazy idea of giving maybe some more law to look at.
All right. Is this the sole purpose of Mr. Smith's testimony, or you have other things to talk with him about?
Well, he's on the witness list. I didn't say necessarily that we're calling him. What I'm trying to do, again, is to limit the presentation to just what's relevant to this particular trial that we have here today. And so I would have...
We're talking, discussing now this motion excluding testimony, but who's your witness to talk about what you're arguing?
We would have a law enforcement witness come in and testify as to the circumstances of that statement. And again, I'm trying to limit it to what's very focused to what's relevant to this trial, and that is the intended effect that he had and its reaction to the confrontation and the symmetry between June 7th and September 4th.
Do you have anything in addition to what you all provided a couple of months ago, seemingly?
We have those 2 documents. We don't have a written document prepared at this time, but we can certainly work on some additional discussion this evening, Your Honor.
All right. Okay, well, we'll reconvene at 9:30.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, very good.